Welcome to this session for Expo Spotlight. It's a special discussion around the future of print, which is a topic that somehow never goes out of date. And the focus with this discussion really is 2024, Drupa, huge line in the sand. Crisis. Is the printing industry in crisis, or is it in a phase of renewal? And I've got with me three gentlemen who've got an opinion and insight from varying angles, but all around the printing gamut, as they say. So going to start kicking off really with Chris. Introduce Chris Jordan from Exedra Bridge. Chris, kick us off into Drupa, because obviously your background, a bit more obviously technology led, but around the commercial printing space. Give us your feel for what this year will mean for the future of print. Are we in crisis, or is it a phase of renewal?
Well, Marcus, I would say we're probably in both. I think there is a lot of renewal. I think there is a lot of potential growth in inkjet in all shapes and forms for lots of different parts of the industry. But I think many of the big suppliers are really having to refocus how they make profit. So I think you have crisis and you have renewal at the same time, which quite often happens. I'll probably start by passing a compliment to Simon, because I really enjoyed the blog that you two did, particularly related to marketing and sales. And to me, this is one of the biggest challenges, and one of the reasons why the traditional suppliers are having great difficulty expanding their market into packaging. I believe from a sales and marketing perspective, they are trying to sell to the brands and the converters as if they were commercial prints. And two things have happened. One is the world has changed dramatically since pre-COVID. And two, the way people buy and sell is very different. So you have to start the process a lot earlier. And I think many of our traditional suppliers are still leading with salespeople, which to me is a huge mistake and will cause them issues. But I think, bottom line, inkjet, amazing potential. Whether it really happens, time will show us all. And in doing consultancy, mentoring, helping individuals and groups in this industry, our last quarter has been probably the best since the credit crunch. And it kind of always happens then as life gets tougher and tougher, geopolitics, interest rates, shipping products or not, then the demand for, or the question, we need help, increases. So I see that continuing in a tough world where leadership is becoming very, very difficult.
Okay, this is interesting. You kind of said there, so pre-19, the world's changed, but we're still operating in a way, or selling product in the way that we probably were doing in the 90s. And to some extent, I do agree with that. I mean, Drupa, massive show, fantastic show, but I see a lot of OEMs sort of just putting all in at Drupa and sort of hoping that it will be the panacea for all their sales ills. You know what I mean? It's like a bonanza of sales. It's got to happen. Do you see that happening?
I would be very happy for many of them if it happened. I hope they have a backup plan, because I really don't see that happening. And as we sort of have discussed in several different environments before, there are lots of other things coming before the press acquisition. The more intelligent print converters and brands are doing all of their work with people. with data, with workflow, and with finishing to some extent before they're looking at changing their press. So I think it has changed.
Thank you very much, Brendan. So are we, a little bit about you. You are chairman of the IPIA, which is UK's leading association for the printing industry. Thank you for joining us. Crisis or renewal, the print industry? Looking at Drupa, will it tell us? Chris has said it's a bit of both. What's your view?
Well, thanks for the promotion, first of all, Marcus. Because I'm general manager, I'll get shot.
Sorry. Yeah,
no, that's okay.
I'm chairman, don't I?
Yeah, that's okay. Yeah, you have to be elected to be chairman. I'm just a civil servant. I'm just a civil servant.
Okay.
So, yeah, I think the industry, it depends what you define as print, and where you're looking at that. Because I think commercial print has been through its crisis already in broad terms. And it probably reached the sort of bottom of that crisis somewhere around between, depending where you were, 2010, 2015. And then it has slowly started to rebuild itself. We've had obviously the big setbacks around COVID, but the overall bubble for commercial print versus and with digital, but this sort of continuous drive just to do digital, all digital only versus print. Of course, they work together excellently, has burst to some degree. And if I look at our print management members, our commercial print members, I was up at a big trade printer of ours in our membership, FlexPress, only yesterday, and they were explaining that they are seeing a significant growth and trend back to print as a method of communication, marketing, engagement, but clever print. So empowered by digital, sending out campaigns that have digital markers on them that trigger to a website as a call to action. Embellishment is a huge growth area for them. And I agree with Chris completely in his order of value in terms of it being probably finishing and software. Finishing first, specialty finishing, or adding value or cleverness to your workflow with finishing first, then software, then people, and then probably presses after that. And I think we have, if you look at areas such as wide format, large format print, print for packaging, short run digital packaging, embellished luxury, short run digital packaging, all of those areas are booming. There is no crisis at all. It is, FlexPress can't move fast enough or invest in equipment fast enough to keep up with demand. For example, on specialty embellished short run digital packaging, so many boutique brands around the nation, around the world, are jumping on that bandwagon to differentiate themselves. And finally, I was having a talk with a leading finishing manufacturer whose chief exec used to work for a global brand. And he was saying that what he sees is a significant strategy where global brands that used to have one big dominant brand, like Coca-Cola or Estee Lauder or something, are now really understanding that you need to now create all of these little sort of sub-brands that fulfill all these little niches and really dress them up and make them unique or bespoke. And they're actively buying up or seeking to create these sort of shorter term fashion or short term brands that are ultra targeted at a specific demographic, shift, a couple of million units before that fad dies out, and then move to the next. And that means that our industry is really well placed to cater for that. So yeah, that's my view.
So there's an alignment there with Chris in the sense that you're saying there will be buying and selling happening at Drupa, but the expected sales of printing machines may be lower, but actually all of the other aspects and technologies that, like you say, suit this kind of short run speciality production that brands are realizing they need because the consumer market's changed, means that they're going to have a good show, but actually people haven't necessarily got the volumes to justify buying the big new machines, with the exception of a few that perhaps at the top. That fair summary?
Yeah, I'd agree that the overall expectation. But I think that most of the big press manufacturers are aware of that trend, are expecting that, but also are really looking at this event as a massive long-term pipeline event. They now know that it's, and it's the trend in trade shows for a long time. They're not expecting to shift kit off the stand. It's a nice thing if it happens. But it's building that massive pipeline of potential sales for the future, creating new relationships, making sure that their target markets around the world are educated about the potential of their technology for the future, so that they can build up, I think, genuinely that sort of 3 to 5 year pipeline of sales. So yeah.
Before we move on to perhaps other sectors within the print, so yeah, Chris mentioned inkjet. Something came out today that was read in Print Week about inkjet being, again, this is sort of like a fairly common theme that comes out every now, and then the inkjet's going to be the dominant growth area for commercial print technology. Would that be something you agree with, or that you kind of go, it's not really news, frankly, or what?
Do you know what? I think it's an evolutionary picture. You had the first dawn of inkjet. It wasn't quite good enough. There was a number of commercial installations, didn't quite stand up scrutiny, kind of had a bit of a retreat. Then this sort of boom and bust cycle stopped. You then had a much more evolutionary approach. But if you look at the sort of top end inkjet presses now, from the likes of Fujifilm or Konica Minolta, or for the higher end bespoke art stuff, the technology's there, it's proven, it's done, and they don't need to make the argument anymore. Mark Stevenson is famous for saying, if people try and challenge me about inkjet and its capabilities now, I just laugh and say, let's move on, because it's done. We've done it. We're getting installations around the world. It's proven, sorted. It's just now a matter of people continuing to see the light, and realizing that because the market's changed so significantly and they're making a choice, do I invest in another 3 toner devices or another big litho press? Well, the latest iteration of these inkjet presses sit beautifully in that middle ground, that allows them to capitalize and make really good profits. So yeah, I think it's now a much more sustainable, normal trajectory for that technology, and it'll only continue to gain steady momentum as time moves forward.
Thank you. So Simon, inkjet, something you know a lot about, and in varying industries, and obviously wide format being one of them. We were talking earlier that Drupa seems to be reflecting a bit of a shift in the trade show market to an extent. Wide format, starting with that, which I guess is the side of packaging, one of the closest relational markets to commercial. How have you seen that play out this year? I mean, do we see more at Drupa than we perhaps had before in terms of technology offering?
Yeah, I think so. I think Drupa is an interesting one this year because it comes in the first half of the year, and other trade shows have pivoted around it, and lots of the bigger players have essentially put all their eggs into the basket that is Drupa. That will end up showing their entire portfolio rather than the bigger machines and the large presses, be those analog or digital. And I think you'll see a prevalence of wide format, partly because of that. A number of the big players didn't go to shows like FESPA this year because they were banking on Drupa, and obviously the cost of doing exhibitions is escalating, and so you have to be a bit brave with your decisions and a bit careful in where you're targeting. So I think the likes of HP, Fujifilm, others will show maybe technology that perhaps they may not have shown at previous Drupas or hadn't been within their remit, but really trying to cover a wider range of application areas and technologies to appeal to the different dynamic of customer that's going to descend on Drupa. I think you'll find that Drupa will have a place, but the amount of effort they've put in and the marketing and the push behind Drupa and some of the pre-show announcements seems to be higher than before. I think they're driving different segments outside of commercial print as well, which will play into kind of some of the OEMs showing a wider range of technology platforms, not just shooting at commercial print and the big beast machines that maybe they have done in previous years.
And so obviously, to mention another show, obviously FESPA is the dominant wide format show. That was significantly smaller this year. Quite a few names were missing. And I guess that really underlines the point you're making, that there's not as much marketing money anymore, and that, Drupa's got the lion's share this year.
It has. And what's kind of interesting for me, and leading on, I mean, Chris mentioned our previous podcast that we did, but there are, Brendan just mentioned that people don't go to exhibit at Drupa now just looking to sell equipment off the stand, which they maybe previously done with very clear ROI objectives. It's about networking, it's about brand salience, it's about being in the conversation over that 1 to 5 year period of if someone's going to invest in technology, that's going to be with you. So I'm hoping that some of them have invested outside of Drupa as well, because clearly there's other ways of telling that story outside of lumping all of your cash behind the biggest exhibition. There's absolutely a place for it. I think we've discussed previously, people want to go and see big ticket items. I mean, when you do go to the trade shows, the busiest stands are always the ones with the most equipment or the biggest pieces, because that's essentially the animal they've gone to see at the zoo, right? It's the thing that people are most interested in. Whether they're interested in investing in the technology or not, they want to see what the state of the art is and what it may be. So sometimes seeing is believing, but there's ways around that as well of bringing attention to the product. So yeah, I think as marketing budgets probably just need to be used a bit more diversely, but for sure there's a lot of companies that are banking on Drupa adding to the pipeline.
And does that suggest to you that the industry is in a state of crisis or renewal?
It's a difficult one. I understand the crisis argument completely. Let's be honest, most segments haven't really grown since 2019. If you look at certain markets that were booming in digital and in inkjet in particular, like textile, they were on a massive growth curve until 2019, and 2023 was essentially just about reclawing back to 2019 output numbers. And so there's absolutely the potential to grow from there. Most of them, you mentioned the article in Print Week, and Smithers and others are all predicting growth. But it has to be growth in the right areas and in the right way. And I think Chris mentioned potential, and I think that's the main thing that it is now. It's potential. It's now on us within the industry to capitalize on that. I think was mentioned earlier that the way of selling to brands and converters is different. Frankly, a brand doesn't care how their product is printed. The consumer for sure doesn't care how it's printed. But what the digital technology will enable, hopefully, and well, it will, and it's about a pivot moment of these micro brands and let's say labels is another good success story in digital. And one of the reasons that label in digital has grown so quickly is because take a small segment like craft beer industry, where it absolutely boomed in the US, because all these microbreweries came and were doing short run bespoke things, and people were really getting into the branding and the kind of the more personal sale. And all the big breweries pivoted and, like Brendan said, created their own small versions of micro brands to compete with the craft. And that massively plays into Inkjet's hands, because it's the shorter run, it's the more design capability that you have within a digital process than a conventional one. And it plays into the other arguments that will no doubt be a focus in Drupa, of things like sustainability, cost, inventory management, regional products, localized labeling and regulations. And I think that's where Inkjet has the biggest potential to grow, is kind of latching onto those areas. And they exist in pretty much every area of print, not just commercial. When you look at more industrial things like flooring, wall coverings, textile, packaging, each of those industries has the same kind of macro trends to address that inkjet has and is well placed to address.
And is that on that basis then consumer change mixed with cost management, mixed with whatever else is going on, that ultimately the demand for volume, traditional analog printing's just fallen through the floor and won't return. So now the digital's time is to kind of help print continue to play a role that's relevant.
Yeah, no, because analog printing is still absolutely valid and will remain. I don't see it dying. It's not growing at the same rate, or doesn't have the potential to grow at the same rate, but it's starting at a much higher position in the market, right, in terms of volume and throughput. One of the challenges is to help people understand that inkjet is not a replacement for analog printing. In many cases, it will be a complementary to allow converters and brands to do these pivot moves on short run, quick turnaround, low inventory stuff. But there's still going to be a massive place for the longer run, lower, less color, kind of simpler designs in all these industries. People aren't just going to forget litho and flexo printing and switch everything to digital, because it doesn't make sense. But what you will find is a lot of the converters, hopefully, that have those realize that putting an inkjet press in doesn't mean turning off a flexo press, because they do different jobs and offer different parts of the market. And so that's where the growth, I think the analog will remain and will be steady for years to come, but the growth potential of digital is becoming more and more obvious.
Chris, is that, you're nodding your head there, you're in agreement there? You're sort of, I know you're sort of saying it's both crisis and renewal, but ultimately is the dominance of the heavy metal machines at Drupa, this is possibly the last year that it'll be that, and it'll be much more about the other aspects of the technology that's driving this.
I think it is, as a new generation comes into commercial print as well, you also have a shift in mindset, and I'm sure others have seen this. But you have an understanding that how you treat your people, what you offer them, how you help them grow is as important as what press you have. So you get a change in dynamics or emphasis, maybe, where the hardware from the old press company, where if the press wasn't running, the boss was terrified. We've moved kind of a long way from that, and now you have probably a generation or something, even some of the older generation now realize this is a balance of people skills, software, the latest technology, and both technologies or multiple technologies. Flexo, litho, even gravure is not going to disappear. Inkjet will be the growth. I'm personally very interested to see what AI does to all of the areas of software outside and inside our industry, because you could see some really fast starters building web to print systems. Most of the software is available off the shelf. Yes, you need a channel to sell it through or a distributor, but most of that software, and even the MIS systems, most of the software is available, written and open source. You can put it together. So I'd love to see some of these really gifted AI developers go, okay, I want to build this kind of system. So tell me the top 20 components I need for a web to print system, and which ones would you compile, and which ones would you reject, and why? Because in the software business, I can see this just completely plowing the field of existing software suppliers. I mean, some of them, I'm sure many of them know about it and are beginning to operate it, but you could see completely new startups in software becoming and building very, very good suites of software within months. That potential is there, and it won't cost you a lot of money to build the software. The thing that costs you the money is obviously the distribution, the relationships, and that kind of stuff. So the AI bit on software particularly really tickles me as to what is going to happen here, because something is going to happen. In talking to the software developers, many of them are aware of it. I think the other thing, going back to the point on Drupa, etc., is for the first time for a long time, I went to an HP event in Bristol recently. And I went along, one, because I hadn't been to an HP event for a while, but I wanted to see the level of professionalism that they were delivering and what kind of event. It was small. And this, to me, is the balance away from Drupa. Small local events, country by country, area by area. This is what grows the network and grows the business over time, just as much as a big one like Drupa.
Yeah, good point. You made a couple of interesting, well, three interesting things you said there. One was initially culture, and that actually the way we used to run businesses needs to change, right? And has to change, be more fluid, more flexible, more open to new things. And that in order to do that, that's a lot about leadership, isn't it? And actually investing in. To be fair, the Drupa team have created really quite a strong content program, which addresses lots of different trends and with some really big name speakers, and also some focus sessions and so on. So they recognise that. Also, I think you're suggesting with your point towards software is, you know, the industry is moving towards the smart factory or the smart production operation. That's interesting. And also with software as well, we know how quickly that can develop, right? And with AI kind of even as an additional accelerant. So that's exciting. So it might inevitably end up being much more around that. Not this year, maybe, but in the future. So that's really interesting. And then lastly, you mentioned the fact that Drupa's gargantuan. It's a great event. It'll do a number of things, but actually just connecting on a local level with a smaller number of people that are actually your peer group, maybe, or even people that are just outside your peer group is as valuable, if not more valuable, than a large trade show.
Yeah, I mean, I think the HP events, I think the London event was quite a size, but most of the other events were 25 to 50 people. If you have a reasonable number of staff there, as Brendan, well, all of you know, you can spend time with each of those people. You can get to understand what their challenges are, what their priorities are, and what their issues are. The bigger the event, the more and more difficult that becomes, which is, let's say a counterbalance to, let's say when FuturePrint is trying to put together a big event. But it's very difficult to spend much time with many people, whereas the small events, they're so beautiful for that. You can say, okay, I have 10 to 20 people. There's 4 people on my staff. Each of you, you pick who the people you want to talk to, and then tell us afterwards what their challenges are, what they're thinking of, which way are they going. And you just build such a fantastic amount of information.
Thank you. Yeah. And Brendan, I'll introduce you now, but Simon, you mentioned also about obviously changing buying behavior and so on, and different ways of doing things and being more circumspect with budget and trade shows and so on. Brendan, you at IPIA run some really good events that kind of mix networking with awards, with content delivery and so on. So 2019 to now, the world's changed, and you're designing these formats because they help people optimize their time. What's working from your perspective, and how's that changing?
So I think just to touch on our events, because you asked the question directly, is that the short answer is, in a heavily digital age where we are so efficient, able to communicate in this format, email, etc., the old and traditional ways of gathering information, finding out about the market, connecting with your peers, and really learning, really dissipated for a while. And if we look back, when I first joined the industry in 2009, the number of actual networking events were far more than we have today. And what the IPA has done is refilled that niche to the best of its abilities, where the number one reason that a print business wants to attend our events, interestingly enough, is not to prospect with print buyers who are there, or print management, print marketing agencies. That's a nice bonus, but that's not why they're there. The number one reason every time we do an event is I want to speak to other printers. I want to understand the pain they're going through in a trusted and relaxed environment where I can have some top quality food and feel relaxed and have a drink or two and be amongst peers and feel safe and have a good chat and understand these are the challenges I'm facing. These are the opportunities I'm pursuing. Yes, we might compete on Monday, but today it's, the sort of, we're in the safe zone, the neutral zone, and let's have a chat and share. And that really works well. So that's the attraction of our events, that spending time with people for many hours in a relaxed environment. And then that's the niche we're filling there. And then just to kind of touch on some of the other points, where I said, our industry and its workflow, I don't think is overall in crisis anymore, because the big are getting bigger, the medium are diversifying and getting incredibly clever in how they set themselves up to be ultra efficient, ultra profitable, diversifying to multiple markets. If you'd walked into FlexPress 10 years ago, big litho, big trade print, that's it. Today, it's, they've gone through wide format, digital packaging, commercial print, business card. They're very diversified and very, very efficient. And the small are selling print. They've divested themselves of a lot of kit. They're adding huge amounts of value, creative design, and extra additional support to their customers. And they are now buying those niche and diversified services from the middle, and they're buying the litho and the really big services from the trade print at the top. And the equipment is all starting to coalesce and calm down to fulfill one of those broad three tiers. But I think we do have a serious crisis when it comes to the perception of our industry. And that is something that the IPA is seeking to address, because it's getting worse and not better. If I go out on the street now and ask a random assortment of 10 people, do you think that, let's just take the core engine for our industry, paper. Do you think paper is good for the environment? And I can promise you 9 will say no. And out of those 9, probably half will think that it's directly contributing to felling virgin rainforest. That is the perception. The perception is the general perception is our industry is not technologically advanced and that it's dirty. The perception is that there are not good career opportunities in our sector. That's this overall generalized perception. And we've identified this, and to cut a long story short, we're doing some specific research work now with an agency in London called Medano to identify what is genuinely the overall national perception of our industry. What is it in reality? 2, who is driving that perception from the top? And then 3, we understand who is driving that perception in terms of key influencers. We can then try to change their minds and create a bit of a cascade effect down. Because the initial work that we did with Medano, from all of the different industries they sector, pharmaceutical, technology, energy, etc., they said print has got the biggest gap, perception terms versus reality, of any sector they've ever seen. It's huge. And they said, this is a fantastic barn door. They're super excited as geeks to work on this with us, because they're like, we've never seen a perception gap so big. So yeah, that's my view.
Oh, no, brilliant. Thank you. Yeah, really interesting. And that perception gap, is it even fixable though? I mean, it's one of those massive, massive problems that you're like, surely we could, which in essence points to, a skill shortage as well, which we know exists. Birth rates low. Gen Z want to move into perhaps more, image, clear industries that are a bit more appealing. Surely technology can fix that problem. Do we need to worry too much about attracting young people?
I mean, Simon can come on this as well from his perspective. Yes, we do. We genuinely, and I don't say this as hyperbole, and that's why we have committed pretty much the maximum IP resource that we possibly can to addressing this problem. We can only do it in the UK for now in trying to narrow that perception gap. Because, by the way, that perception gap isn't the same in different European countries. In France, no. In France, it's quite small. In France, the perception gap between what the perception of print is and the reality of it is actually is much narrower, because it's a big part of as a cultural icon. It's not the same in Germany as well. Print for many years in Germany has had, the government and supporting Heidelberg and everything else really bashing it. And print is seen culturally, not only there's a better understanding of sustainability and everything else, it's a much bigger cultural part. In the UK, it's horrendous. So we're having a good crack at that. And yeah, we're 15 years away from a cliff crisis with experience and knowledge in our industry and people retiring out unless we can do something about it.
It's a bit depressing the UK is behind again. I mean, blimey, hell. So Simon, what's your view on that? I mean, at least print is not behind, in other countries. But what's your view, sort of wrapping up on this sort of skill shortage issue? And actually, because that does perfectly link, as Brendan said, that is a crisis. What's your view?
My view is we don't do ourselves any favors. It's really interesting to hear the comments on the perception gap, because actually I didn't really realize it was as big as it seems to be. But what we're kind of bad at selling the technology to people that are interested in the technology. We're really bad at selling the print outside of the print industry to anybody that's interested in joining. I mean, I guess we're sat here for middle-aged white men on a call, which again doesn't speak volumes for the industry. If you go to most events, it's a very similar demographic, and there's no doubt that there are a large number of very well-established, very capable people in this industry that are approaching their time to want to move on into retirement and do other things, and the flow of new talent is not there. Gallus has talked about it for a long time. Many others. There's these amazing initiatives on women in print, but we don't really talk about diversity in print very much, and the young people and the skills. And it should be an easy sell, right? We do some unbelievable projects. There's massive sustainability benefits, which are a key kind of political topics for most of the younger generation coming through on climate change, on regulated activity, on safety, product safety, but it's environmental impact primarily. And let's just take the digital part of print. There are fundamental, obvious benefits of doing it. The perception of paper is a strange one, because you have other kind of areas where plastic is the thing that's frowned upon the most, and paper is the solution to the ocean plastic issue, and we kind of have to square that circle a little bit. But I don't think we're very good at selling the real kind of fundamental benefits of the industry outside it, and the fun and exciting projects. Digital print, I mean, this is kind of running off topic a little bit in terms of Drupa, but you will see at Drupa like a lot more than commercial print. There will be textile, which there's a massive sustainability benefit of digital print over conventional print in textile. You will see packaging, you'll see pharmaceutical. Digital print is working in the cosmetics industry, in kind of medical applications. There's such a diverse base of technology and projects that our industry can kind of cover, and yet that doesn't seem to excite people, be it AI, software. There's so many facets to it as well. It's not like you're just a chemist like me and you're sitting in your chemistry lane and playing in the labs. That's really not what print's about anymore. And I think we all have a responsibility to kind of think about ways of bringing that new talent in, because for sure, maybe not in every country, but you do hear it from, I mean, Gallus is in Swiss German, right? They're talking about the fundamental issues of bringing people through, and so I don't think it's a UK only problem. Maybe it's exacerbated here a bit more.
I think it's the perception gap that's massive in the UK. Is that right, Brendan? Yeah, compared to other countries, skill shortages is a global issue, isn't it? Yeah, but our perception gap here seems to be worse.
And I think that it's a great, I'm going to stop turning this around as a frustration. It's a fantastic opportunity for us because as I see it with my own colleague, Natalie Evans, she's our membership manager, mid-20s. She knew nothing about our industry. Genuinely, that perception I told you about, 100% with her. She just applied for the job and thought, well, I'll have a go. And now, within 6 months of joining, within days of going out to her first event, her mind was blown. She loves this industry, and she is your absolutely stereotypical, mid-20s, total digital native, up on every single issue you can imagine. She loves this industry and now never wants to leave it. And I see the same in many other of our OEM members or printer businesses where they can finally get a young person in through the door. Once they're through that door, their mind's blown. So this issue, and that's what we're trying to work on, is once you get a young person to actually understand and see the opportunities and how incredible our sector is, they don't leave again. Once they're in, they're stuck. I'm another example of that. I joined this industry in my mid-20s and knew almost nothing about it. My mind was blown. I'm still here. It's just trying to get that messaging across, which we haven't done well enough as a sector for decades. If we can get it across, we have immense potential to tap into.
Brilliant. So really sort of summarising it, Drupa, it sounds like to me that Chris's original point, is it's crisis and renewal, probably is right, actually. I mean, it sounds like to me that the big macro trends are starting to really that we've been talking about for 10 years are starting to really place a lot of pressure down on the industry in terms of forcing change. Less money in the system means there is less money to buy and be speculative with big investments. And this consumer change means we're buying, or they're investing in technology that enables shorter run, speciality, and all of those sort of things. Software's come to the fore, as you said, Chris, AI, and partly to help us with skill shortages, but also to accelerate and improve productivity and new possibilities. And not least the kind of trend towards the kind of smart factory industry 4.0. So it seems like there could be a bit of a melting pot for, in essence, which will be a transformative Drupa, really. I don't know if there's anybody final thoughts before we sign off.
I think to me, it's always been a techno industry. So I've always called it techno print. I've sold it to sixth formers, and I've excited them as I was excited in my early 20s when I started as a developer. And, it is just super technical and it's accelerating. What I see, Simon does in his area, what I see let's say, companies like Neos, like Bernstein, like some of the small startups on the inkjet area, I mean, they're just bending all the rules. And they're using technology and other skills. And I'm frustrated, as all of you are, about the lack of people. I think the problem is we never really cared about it. We didn't think it was a problem, and all of a sudden it has become a big problem. I find it extremely frustrating that I live in one of the most creative countries on the planet that doesn't like the word creative, because creative in France makes print very acceptable. And it's that creativity which we pour into the world that we're extremely good at. That I get so frustrated that we can't en masse get that across to a generation who are techies. That's what we are. We're techies. And we happen to be in print, and it never stops, and it is frustrating as hell, as everybody says.
Simon and Brendan, just before we sign off, thank you, Chris.
No, I think Drupa has the potential to be not a watershed moment, but the start of the future, if you like, the start of us driving digital into more areas. I think inevitably you will have a lot of buzz around the top sellers, the big boys, and what I'd encourage people is to look beyond that, and there will inevitably be some amazing technology that people are presenting there that maybe goes a little bit unnoticed in the mainstream, because everybody will be talking about what Canon's doing, what HP's doing, what Benny Lander's coming with, what Fuji, Bob's, Comexi, or all the main players are going to be doing, and they will bring some, from what I read, from what you see about what's going to be presented, there is a bit of a step change in some of the packaging areas, in some areas of commercial print that really can or have the potential to drive some growth. But there will also be lots of other little niche things that happen there. I'm sure that if people take the time to look around, and it's a monstrous place to try and navigate, but take time out away from just the massive stands, because I think there will be a lot of new technology that's will inevitably be adopted by the big players in the longer term as well.
Yeah, and also some new business models. I'm looking forward to hearing about people like Gelato and so on that are exhibiting, that have got this kind of like platform that's completely different, that's going to provide plays to the consumer change and is still print, but is actually the business model is completely different. So I think there'll be a number of that. Anything before we leave everyone, Brendan?
Yeah, I mean, I think that you can all nod your heads or disagree with me vociferously, but I think we all get this gut feel. The global print industry needs a global exhibition, and Drupa's it. All the others have fell by the wayside, and there is room for one global exhibition. And I think after this one, Drupa will find its water level. We'll see whether it's kind of overpitched or underpitched, or where it sits on that water level this time, but it'll find its level, because the industry, in general terms, there are huge amounts of positives. I think that probably then there is space for a national trade show in the top 10 biggest print industries in the world. We're currently 5th, 6th, depending on which metric you look at, which is why we still have a national print exhibition in the print show. Those will hang on if they run well, or they'll be replaced by something else. Out of that top 10, roughly, you will then see what Chris was talking about earlier, where there is national, open houses, smaller events, and there just won't be space or enough money in their systems to have a national trade show. And yeah, I think my final point is, and I see Drupa doing this as well, our industry and all of the clever people within it will take care of itself. But we are not each other's enemy. The market is our enemy. And we have to work harder as a collective to change that perception gap. If we don't, that's our crisis, and it's already here. It's not one that's coming. It's here now, and it's affecting us badly. If we can just uncork that perception gap in many other industry areas around the world, our industry will be fine.
Well, that's awesome. Listen, thanks very much for joining us all. Really brilliant contributions. Looking forward to see you all in Düsseldorf.